evening, all of you, and welcome to this free webinar that we're having today on a very interesting product. This is an introductory session to the product which we know as employee compensation. Earlier, it used to be called workman compensation. Now, the terminology has been changed with an amendment in the Act, which is, this is a statutory product. Rather, this policy has to be taken by corporates and clients as a statutory requirement, like how we have the Motor Vehicles Act, and so motor insurance is compulsory. Like that, the Workmen Compensation Act is a statute which governs and requires some of the corporates to compulsorily opt for this cover for their workmen. So this is the product that we'll look at in the next 30 minutes. I welcome all of you on behalf of IRA Coaching, and we will get started with the policy. So like I said, now the very word is employee compensation, which means it can be an employee, it can be a workman who are employed by an organization, by a factory, by an industrial owner, by a business person. Even for that matter, today this policy is very common and it's being taken by IT companies, software companies, service industry. So somewhere the need for this product is gaining a lot of significance, and many insurance companies have made it a very, very simple process to purchase this policy, right? So we look at the overall scope and applicability of this product in this short webinar today. I hope my audio video is clear to you and you're able to see the presentation that I'm making. So right now, what is covered, right? So like we saw, WC, as we call it, Workmen's Compensation Insurance Policy actually covers the legal liability of the employers. So if I'm the employer, I have let's say 12 staff or 15 staff, or let's say 25 workmen in the factory. I keep engaging people, right? I have employees in my company. So if I'm the employer, then I am legally liable for compensation under two particular acts, right? The situations we look at, but first of all, I need to understand, like I already mentioned, this is a statutory requirement. The policy has to be taken by a few employers as per the provisions of two statutory acts, which we need to know. One is Workmen's Compensation Act of 1923, and the other is Fatal Accident Act of 1855, right? So fatal accident was the original statute which was in force, which, like the word itself says, it was only talking about the fatal accidents where the workmen would end up losing their lives in the course of performing their duties in the office. Maybe there's an accident or there is some occupational disease, anything, just because of the work that they're doing in the organization, they lose their life, right? So that was predominantly the scope of fatal accident. But then this Workmen Compensation Act is a much wider act where it talks about even the injury and disease situations. And it is much wider in terms of governing what is the procedure to claim this compensation, which are the codes which will offer this kind of compensation, what is the basis on which the compensation amount should be arrived. So all these nitty-gritties are clearly provided in this particular act, which is called Workmen's Compensation Act. Now, further drilling down into the policy, if we see the employee compensation policy enables the employer to pay the compensation to the employees or for their family in case of death. So I said, right, in case of not only death or bodily injury, right? In case of death or bodily injury, now this injury can be permanent total disablement, permanent partial disablement, or it can also be a very temporary kind of disablement, like a fracture, or somebody who's got admitted for some mild injuries and then he came back to normal, temporary. That also it takes care. So basically, a client or a businessman or an industrialist will take this policy to meet such liability, to pay the compensation to their employees or their family members in case of death or bodily injury to the employees, right? Now, the second point is very important: caused due to injury and accident at workplace. So it's not like, if the employee is exposed to this kind of death or bodily injury anywhere. No. This particular product, this particular act stipulates that this death or bodily injury should occur because of their work, because of handling their job and responsibilities in the workplace, right? So it can be an injury, it can be an accident, it can be any other situation where that leads them to this kind of bodily injury or death. So it also includes a few occupational diseases. You will know that, in the case of some hazardous industries which involve, the raw material could be hazardous, or the manufacturing process can be very, very hazardous. One example is, the coal mines. So people who work in coal mines, they are exposed to a few occupational diseases. Over a period when they work in the coal mine, they develop certain diseases. So this is occupational disease which is unique to the duties that the employee performs in the work area. So if the policy pays for compensation to the employees or their family for what? For death or bodily injury, and this death or bodily injury should be caused due to an accident at the workplace, right? And not just accident, it also includes a few occupational diseases which we will look at. So now another important phrase that the policy will contain in the insuring clause: this injury or accident should arise out of and in the course of employment. So you will need to understand the entire definition of this entire slide that we're talking about. Though it is given in bits and pieces, it is one holistic explanation of what is actually covered in the policy, right? There are many elements to this. We'll look at it once again. So employee compensation policy enables the employer, right? It is basically available for employers to pay the compensation to the employees. That is the first thing, right? Whatever court awards. So to pay that compensation, this policy will reimburse to the employee, like an insurance cover. So to pay the compensation is the first one. It can be either to the employee or to the family, right? Obviously, if the employee dies, then it goes to the legal heir, which is the family, right? So that is also the second point. And for what does it pay? Death or bodily injury. This is very important to understand. So the death or bodily injury of the employee has to occur. And when you talk about injury, it can be permanent in nature, it can be partial in nature, it can be completely total disablement, or it can also be temporary disablements where, the workman is forced to stop working, and then he recovers and comes back to the job. So all the disablements are covered under this policy. And further down, if you look at the second point, this death or bodily injury should be caused by an injury or an accident at the workplace. This is also a very important thing that we need to know, including occupational diseases. So not only injury or accident, it also covers certain occupational diseases, right? Like we already saw. And the other important phrase, again, just to reiterate, so these should arise out of and in course of the employment. It should be because of the nature of work that the employee is doing in the course of his employment. It is not that he met with an accident on the road when he is, on a holiday, and or he fell down in his house. No, clearly this policy is the accident or the injury or death should happen arising out of and in course of the employment, that the activity that the employee is involved. So right now, some statistics for us. So actually, like we're seeing on the right side, occupational diseases. 2 million people die at work. For you, statistics is like this because of the smoke, maybe in the industries, because of, the pollution that happens, or like I said, in the case of coal mining, or in the case of power plants, or in the case of, some burning process that happens, people very easily develop lung disorders, right? So they can have a breathing issue, or they can have, many people suffer from TB, tuberculosis. Like this, there are many occupational diseases that they're forced to encounter. So that is the statistics on the right side for you, right? Like there are many other, it's just not just your lung diseases. It can also be heart and circulatory problem that could arise, or tumors or mental health disorders, also musculoskeletal, right? So again, it's a question of establishing beyond doubt that this disease has happened because of and in the course of the employment. This is something that the employee has to prove in the court of law. So what does the policy cover? The policy covers the medical expenses, right? Like we saw, whatever hospitalization medical expenses are needed to treat for the injury that happens. Also occupational diseases, like we already saw. And some important injuries and disease could be compressed air disease, like I saw the most common being the lung-oriented ailments. And it also covers terrorism. For some reason, when the terrorism risk was getting very, very popular, and we were seeing attacks very often. The act stipulated that all the employers who take this insurance should definitely take the cover available for terrorism as well. So terrorism also can be taken within the policy. Now, having understood the basic, overall objective of the product, who takes it and why they take it, there are, a few, like we already saw these, but these are very important add-ons. So whenever an employer goes for a workman compensation policy, primarily it is death and bodily injury, but there are certain add-on features or unique features that are attached to this product. So obviously, when you generally see contract site works or project works, which is where you have the exposure of this kind of diseases or injuries happening to the workmen. So there will be contractors involved, there will be subcontractors involved. So it is possible to cover all the employees within one policy also. Like you mention all the contractors' names, and in turn they would have given subcontracts, so their names can be included and their employees can also be added under the policy. So we can have a holistic policy, and that's why this add-on is very, very important, which is contractor or subcontractor coverage. So that you have all the policy, all the coverages within one policy. The renewal becomes easy and you don't miss out on covering somebody. Like this, you can, for administrative reasons also, it helps. And the second thing, like I already told you, it is terrorism also is an add-on cover. It is not inbuilt, but it's an optional cover which is available for employers to take by paying additional premium. Now, the other feature of WC, if you want, you can also take it pan-India coverage. So why we're saying pan-India is, see, generally when you go for WC, the policy will be restricted to the factory location. That means if at all something happens to the employee in the course of employment in the factory premises, the factory can be in Rajahmundry, the factory can be in Orissa or Delhi, or one place where the location, in the location that it is situated. But you can take an add-on by covering or extending the policy to cover pan-India location. So I can give an example, like there's, let's say, some employee who is, for the sake of employment, he is traveling from one branch to another, from, let's say, branch to head office, or he's traveling to the client place. So something can happen to him. So as long as it is for work, job purpose that he's traveling, then even if it is outside the location, we can give pan India cover. But this is an additional cover which has to be taken by choice, and there will be an additional premium also that will be chargeable for this add-on. Now, medical expenses. See, generally, when we talk about death or bodily injury cover, the court will give the compensation, and that compensation will be repaid under this policy, right? So the court will say to the employer, this is the compensation that you need to pay to the employee or his family. So it can be for death or bodily injury. But right now, even medical expenses, let's say, like I said, if it's a temporary disablement, nothing really happened to him, so the compensation will be mainly towards medical expenses, maybe some small injuries he had. But for that also, if he has to go to the hospital, he may spend a few thousand, let's say 20,000, 50,000, something like that. So that also can be taken as an additional cover under the policy, but there will be sub limits that will be put generally by the insurance companies, right? Now, one more important feature that many insurance companies are offering today, it's a very interesting feature. It's very useful for employers also and for the employees also. that in case the medical extension is given as an add-on cover, that cover we can also give cashless. So what do you mean by cashless? Like in our health policy, we know what is cashless, right? So if somebody has typical health insurance card, they go to the hospital, they take the treatment, and the insurance company will directly pay to the hospital. Right? The employee just needs to show the card. So typically, even under WC, that feature has been enabled. So if somebody in the course of employment gets injured, he need not claim under health insurance. He can straight away claim under WC and also take cashless benefit if this additional extension has been taken by the employer. So mostly, if you see the situation, how it works, generally corporates or businesses, they take health insurance for their regular employees. But when it comes to workman compensation, like I said, it is generally compulsory cover. For certain industries where the activity is very hazardous in nature, or risky, right? So they have to compulsory. So all these industries and the nature of activities are mentioned in the Workman Compensation Act. So if those factories, if they have to necessarily take WC policy, it's a compulsory cover, right? So in that case, for workmen they will go for this compulsory WC cover, and for their regular employees, generally they will take a health insurance policy. This is how generally we see in the market how the businesses will choose the product. But the good thing is, even in WC, we have the cashless feature that can be offered for the benefit of the employees. Now, one more interesting factor that you need to know. Now, like I said, okay, generally WC means what comes to our mind is people working in the mines or in the project sites or contract sites, civil construction. These are the people who are really susceptible to very risky activities and injuries. So workmen, that's why we say workmen compensation. But now, like I said, recently, the product has been renamed as employee compensation because many other industrial sectors, many other service sector businesses also have started adopting for this policy, right? So in that case, even employees can be covered, not just workmen in the working site, but even employees who are working in office can also be covered under this policy. So when you say employees, probation, there could be some employees from day one. Once you appoint an employee, generally they are put on probation. Those probationary employees also can be included. Regular full-time employees can anyway be included, right? Part-time employees who are not like, maybe they don't have PF gratuity, they are part-time. Still, they can also be included under the WC policy by clearly listing their names and adding their names under the policy. Elected officials and temporary employees as well. So temporary employees generally happens in the case of contractors because they have these workmen who will come on a piecemeal basis, right? For certain activity, for certain job tasks, they may be employed. So these kind of temporary employees also, just that they will be flagged as temporary in the policy, and the period has to be clearly mentioned for which period they were actually employed. So for that period, if anything happens to them, any death or injury happens to them because of their job, then the policy will pay the compensation to them for death or bodily injury. So now for your idea, just now, like I said, some of the industries, it is compulsory to take this policy. So just for your idea, there are some industries and firms that generally take WC because they deal with very hazardous activity or they deal with risky activity, right? So some of these examples for your understanding, it can be, like I said, firms, corporates, associations, right, who are employing workers on contract. So contract basis, whoever is appointing, they can straight away take this policy. And in any Indian firm hiring a worker in a foreign country. So this is also, generally if you have any people who are either drivers or laborers or, people who are doing menial jobs, these people are the people who are exposed to accidents during the course of employment. So, so there is a possibility of taking the policy, especially in India. Okay, generally compensations will be given, but in case if somebody has to be appointed in a foreign country, it's a very, very tricky, right? So in foreign country and all, compensation is big time. it's very easy to get compensation by the awarded by the court. So there also you can suggest this policy. Shipping ports, docks, companies, typically ship owners, ship builders. So here it is almost like a project site. Here the workmen who are involved are highly exposed to very risky activities. They can take WC, and construction firms, contractors, civil contractors, builders. So builders not just building new property, but those who are generally doing repair work. You must have seen these, contractors who take contracts for whitewashing. So it's a very risky job, isn't it? You see those workmen who are putting those julas and painting the whole building. So this is not new construction, but this is the repairing or even maintenance of the building. Any small project also, if it's for short duration also, let's say, So when you talk about contracts, one other thing is, typically in WC, the period of insurance is generally not necessary 12 months. See, all general insurance policies are 12 months, right? Annual policies. But in the case of WC, you tend to see shorter policies. Mostly WC policies is given for the period of the project. Like I said, whitewashing. So whitewashing means it may happen for 4 weeks or 6 weeks of a big complex. So the policy, the project itself, the contract period is 6 weeks. So policy is also taken for 6 weeks, or maybe little because it may get delayed, they may take for 2 months. So shorter period policies are very, very, very common in the case of workmen compensation policy. So construction firms, civil engineering firms, like I said, nuclear mining, coal mining, right? So, and very important, the recent one being corporates. So even the IT sector, service sector, banks, insurance, all these industries are also nowadays looking at taking the WC policy for their employees. Farming companies, right? Seed companies, the fertilizer companies, all these companies, the activity there is such that they need to employ workers at the time of farming, at the time of harvesting, right? At the time of let's say the weeding process. So many things they engage workmen. So in all these process, they can take a WC policy for their employees. So right now, like I said, the WC has been renamed and reintroduced as employee compensation insurance. This is something that all of us, some of you, maybe if you're, have been there in the insurance industry for long, we only heard of WC policy, right? Right now it is EC, employee compensation. We no more call it as WC policy. So after this policy got renamed and reintroduced, now all employers can opt. So initially when it was WC, mostly the statutory requirement, whoever had those industries only used to take the WC policy. But right now, since it has been reintroduced, because there is a need, right? Because there is a need, there is a lot of exposure for employees to get, either injured or they exposed to several risks in their business activity. So it has been opened up to all the employers. So all employers can opt for this, especially the major service industries and all that. They take this policy to meet the medical expenses. Right? Immediate medical expenses will be there for some small injuries because of the work situation. So this is something you don't want to wait. You don't, anyway, you may have a health insurance policy also. But many employers are right now preferring WC also as an additional layer, as an additional cover. So one thing is, see, in spite of having a health insurance policy, if an employee goes and files a complaint or suit against you in the WC court, we call it so. So this is again, these compensations generally have to come through the court, right? So the court has to, that's the way we said legally liable. Whatever the employer is legally liable to pay. That means what? The court has to award a compensation that the employer has to pay to the employee or to his family. So here it is important that the employee files a complaint against the employer in the court of law. So this court is generally called Workmen's Compensation Commissioner, CWC it's called, right? So now in the case of the regular corporates like IT sector or even the service sector, why employers are going for this policy is, though they have health insurance, but at least for the medical expense, they still take a WC or this EC as it is called right now. So that, in case the employee goes to the court and files a complaint, they have some cover, they have some insurance which can provide them the compensation. So the employer ensures that he is fully covered against the legal liability. So like I said, recent trend is even IT companies, IT enabled service companies are also opting for employee compensation insurance. So now just this last slide before we close, simply for your basic understanding. So generally what the court will award, how does this compensation? See, one thing is, the compensation is very tricky. It depends on various factors, and all these factors are enlisted in the act. So how to arrive at the compensation? What are the broad regulations and guidelines based on which the court will award is all there in the WC Act. But still, whatever the court gives as compensation is final, and it is important that the employer has to pay that compensation because he becomes legally liable to pay. So how this is arrived? For an example, so in the case of accident resulting in disablement, generally mostly the pain is where sometimes the accidents happen in such a way that the workman becomes totally disabled. He's not he loses his one limb, or he loses sight, vision, like this. It's the case of a permanent total disablement. So how generally, as a thumb rule for you to understand, the compensation will be somewhere like 50% of the injured employee's monthly wage. So right now, since he's permanently disabled, he's not able to earn his salary. He has to support his family. So the compensation is something that is arrived like, it's equal to 50% of whatever the monthly wage that employee was earning. And that is multiplied by a certain factor, like a certain number based on the age of the employee, right? So, if he's younger, then the multiplying factor would be higher. If he's a little older, that means, the service will be less, so the multiplying factor will be less. So 50% of monthly wage into multiplied by the relevant factor, that will be the compensation. But it is subject to a maximum of 1.2 lakhs for permanent total disablement. So there are caps, there are sublimits, but I'm just giving you an example of how the compensation is arrived. So in the case of accidental death, let's say the person dies because of some business activity, some activity in the workplace, then it is 60% of the monthly wage, right? Whatever that employee was getting, 60%, and a relevant factor will be multiplied. Here, the upper limit is 1,40,000, right? So death means it's 1,40,000, disablement means 1,20,000. Plus, in the case of death, what they also get as additional compensation is 5,000 funeral expenses. So now, like I said, the relevant factor, how it is arrived at means is a complete clear-cut table that has been prescribed in the Workmen Compensation Act. Like I said, it is based on the age of the employee, right? It is in section 4 of the Employee Compensation Act. So based on the age of the employee at the time of accident, there will be a certain number that will be given, which is called the relevant factor. So to that, the monthly wage is multiplied. So this just to give you an overall nutshell of how the compensation is calculated. And this is awarded by the Commissioner for Workmen Compensation. And once the court awards this amount, the employer becomes liable to pay it to the employee or his family. And whatever is his legal liability is protected and covered under the employee compensation insurance policy. So right now, this is the short webinar that we have right now for today. And I hope you found it useful and interesting. So we do have detailed long-term courses in case you want to understand much more deeper, like, the process, the documents that are involved, or the premium rating, or the structure of the policy. All these things we deal in the detailed courses. In case you're interested, you can look up our website, which is www.iracoaching.com. And whenever any programs get listed there, if you are interested, you can enroll yourself and also share the information with your friends and colleagues. So I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you so much for joining. So many of you, wonderful to have all of you with us. And we'll keep the learning process continuing. And please look out for the messages on some more free webinars that we keep coming up every week. And I'm sure you will make use of them. And if you found it useful, please ensure to pass this message to your friends and colleagues who will find it useful. So right now, thank you so much for joining, and we will catch up in the next webinar. Thank you.